Every day, these people take serious risks, working in some of the toughest conditions imaginable. They put themselves in harm's way, facing dangers most would find too scary to contemplate. All of this effort is just to deal with an invasion of, no, not aliens, but crabs. A huge red monster that devours all living things in its path. Animals can't resist its appetite. The crab leaves behind only devastation and spreads with great speed. But the most important thing is that this crab is worth a lot of money. So this is a red king crab, and this is the story of how it took over the planet. It's an actual invasion. These crabs keep moving forward, and even if they're in a hurry, they're claiming more area each year. Environmentalists are worried. I mean, for real. The monsters used to call the yellow area home, but then humans, as usual, brought them to another place, over to the Kola Peninsula. Who could have guessed it would turn out to be such a bad move? Ever since crabs landed on the Kola Peninsula, they found the place quite cozy. And you know what happens when animals get comfy? They start multiplying. Soon there were so many crabs causing a bit of a headache for the traditional fishermen. Surprisingly, unlike most invasive creatures, these crabs are turning out to be a real cash cow. The more crabs there are, the better the deal. Crabs just keep coming. Now the Norwegians are split into two groups. Some are excited about the possibilities, while others just want the crabs to go back where they crawled from. But first, let's figure out what kind of invaders we're dealing with. Steve? We're talking about these guys. Red king crabs are a species of hermit crabs. They also look a bit different because they don't hide in shells. They're also huge. The shell of a red king crab can stretch up to 11 inches wide, with legs that span up to 6 feet and a weight of around 28 pounds. Yes, we're talking about crabs, legs longer than Steve's height. But the red king crab isn't just big, it's got some other cool features too. Red king crab holds the top spot as the most sought-after crab species in the market. It's also the priciest, meaning even 4 ounces of this crab can hit your wallet hard. And this is his most valuable part, legs. Yes, the ones that are damn long. They say the red king crab is very tasty, but from the crab itself, everything around is delicious. It likes to eat, so with its massive appetite, the crab eats everything it comes across, including local crustaceans, shellfish, and sea urchins. I can't figure out what exactly it's chewing here, but you can clearly see that the crab's pinchers are perfectly adapted for such a lifestyle. And this is an important natural predator of the red king crab, the giant Pacific octopus. But it only lives in the Pacific Ocean, where it keeps the crab population in check. There are no such octopuses in European waters, which means that crabs can do whatever they want. So you see, these invaders are mostly just hungry. It'd be great if they stuck to munching on marine life on the ocean floor, but here's the catch. Fishermen in the Lofoten Islands are upset because these crabs are wrecking their nets with their claws. And it's not just out of spite, they're after the herring and cod that the fishermen worked hard to catch. So the result is a situation where the locals are left with no catch and torn nets. However, these crabs aren't exactly solitary creatures. They form massive groups, with each colony containing as many as 10,000 individuals. And you know what? They're always on the hunt for a snack. Just one of these colonies throws the whole ecosystem out of balance by chomping down on everything in sight and leaving the seabed bare. But before getting into Norwegian waters, red king crabs have come a long way, and it took a lot of time. In general, it's a species found off the coast of the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. Actually, the red king crab lived there quietly until the 1960s, when Soviet scientists decided to bring crabs to Murmansk in the Kola Peninsula as an experiment. Another account suggests a simpler explanation. The goal was to set up favorable conditions for a new and lucrative fishing operation. For a while, it seemed to everyone that the experiment was not a success. The crabs did not reproduce in a new place. But then, in the late 1970s, red king crabs showed up off the coast of Norway, surprising everyone. Little did they know this was just the start. By the 90s, these sea critters had spread southwest along the Norwegian coast and north to Svalbard. Turns out, these days you can spot red king crabs not just in Russia, but also out in Norway. They've made it past the North Cape, which people usually think of as the northernmost spot in Europe, and went down the coast to the Lofoten Islands. Scientists even crunched the numbers and figured out they're moving at an average speed of around 31 miles per year. Can you believe it was humans who did this? Once again, they relocated animals to places they shouldn't be. And now look at this mess we're in. Do you know what's going on here? Is this a sleeping polar bear being carried to a better place? Nope. The story is a bit odd, yet I'm happy Steve brought it up. Living in a Canadian national park was Joey, a Colombian brown bear, and he appeared to be doing quite well despite being an albino. Then came encounters with people who mistakenly identified him as a polar bear. Now what's a polar bear doing so far from the North Pole? Probably lost and in trouble. So they figure the bear needs to be urgently taken home. Joey was temporarily sedated with tranquilizers, lifted up by helicopter, and left in the Arctic. Soon, local experts encountered the poor bear, discovering it shivering in the cold. Clearly, this bear wasn't cut out for life in the far north and was smaller than its white counterparts. A closer examination confirmed the suspicion it was an albino brown bear. Joey was sent back to his home in the national park. But things took a weird turn and the story started to sound pretty far-fetched. They claimed they painted Joey to avoid any confusion, but then his fur grew back and they tried to send the bear to the North Pole again. It's just plain crazy. While we stumbled upon many accounts of this story, there's a noticeable absence of details such as the exact year, location, or even some last names of those involved. Simply put, it's a bit hard to believe. The reality is, brown bears can indeed make their way up north and mess with the daily lives of their polar cousins. Let me illustrate. Imagine the northernmost scene possible. A polar bear chowing down on a whale's leftovers. It's a perfect meal deal for polar bears with plenty of fat to help them tough out the cold. Recently, something odd has been happening. Grizzly bears are taking over where polar bears used to roam, moving even farther up north. Look at this whale carcass again. But now the polar bears aren't getting to enjoy their lunch. The grizzlies chased them off, and they aren't willing to share. A few years back, scientists started noticing that grizzlies chase their polar cousins away from food, even though polar bears are nearly twice their size. It all boils down to the grizzlies being more aggressive. People worry that grizzly bears' aggressive actions might add extra pressure on polar bears who are already having a tough time. But let's get back to red king crabs. People couldn't just let things slide, especially considering how pricey these crabs are. Despite their rapid takeover, both Norway and Russia protect this species through a fisheries agreement. A joint commission figures out how to handle crab populations and sets limits on how many can be caught. Let's take Russia. Red king crabs can only be harvested if they're male and have a shell wider than 6 inches. This is allowed during the fishing season, which spans from mid-August to mid-December and requires crabs to be caught away from the coastline. There are many conditions to meet. In Norway, the rules aren't too stringent, allowing for noticeably bigger catches. Red king crabs are off limits in the north, and in the south, harvesting is done within set limits. Let's get one thing straight. Just because an animal's tasty and precious doesn't mean we can go around catching it endlessly. Following rules, abiding by restrictions, and respecting agreements between countries are key to preventing a species from disappearing and maintaining a balanced market demand. And here's an interesting thing. Check out how many crabs they haul in. Each catch means big profit, and fishermen are up for the challenge. The catch is, it's a tough call between preserving nature and chasing profits. Sure, the red king crab is an invasive species, and it'd be smarter to catch them all to help out the locals, but hey, selling these crabs is a gold mine. So they're catching just enough to let the population bounce back in a year, and the cycle continues. Animal migration, whether seasonal or permanent, isn't always something people can take advantage of. People have some luck with crabs, more or less. Do you remember the reindeer story? Oh yeah, these are beautiful animals, a real treat for the eyes. But last year, at least 42 such deer crossed the dilapidated fence from the Norwegian to the Russian side of the Pasvik Nature Reserve. The deer didn't do anything wrong, they were just being deer. They wandered into a new area and nibbled on some plants. Russia claimed it caused environmental damage and put a price tag on the losses ranging from $4,700 to $4.4 million. Yes, for the grass that 42 reindeer ate. And no one really knows how long they hung out on someone else's turf, which is why the estimates vary so much. It all ended sadly. At least 40 of the 42 animals that crossed the border were returned to Norway and killed due to fears that they would cross the border with Russia again, and it seems in order not to pay such an incredible amount. Following that, Norway declared its intention to fix the 93-mile fence to prevent similar incidents in the future. Even though 40 animals might not seem like much considering the overall reindeer population in Norway, it's still a shame. This migration didn't go as planned. When it comes to the red king crabs, things aren't as simple. While some Norwegians complain that they're losing fishing gear, catch, and money because of crabs, others can start a completely new life. Not too long ago, Budgines was a quiet fishing village on the edge of decline, with tiny houses dotting the tundra. The community was on the brink of collapse. On top of that, work was scarce. Years of overfishing and mismanagement had stymied cod quotas. The boats just sat there, not doing much. People who chose to stick around the village had to make do with the little money they could still make from fishing and working hard, and then the crab showed up.
Starting in the 1980s, local fishermen began to catch mysterious skinny giants in their nets. These alien-looking creatures, brandishing two formidable pinchers, weighed much more than the crabs that were sometimes trapped in more southern regions. Red king crabs have changed everything.
Now the locals earn good money by catching crabs and selling them for $5 per 2 pounds.
Crabs stay in these tanks until they're ready to head to restaurants and eventually end up on the plates of seafood enthusiasts worldwide. If you've ever savored a red king crab, chances are it might have come from this village.
Deciding whether the end of the red king crab tale is a happy one is a bit tricky. It might take another 10 years to figure out if these creatures will continue moving down south, and if that brings about new problems. While we wait, let's check out other cases of invasions. And no, it's not about toads in Australia, pythons in Florida. Burmese pythons. Actually, they come from Southeast Asia, but they got to the United States through the trade in exotic pets. And then they just wreck the local ecosystems. Pythons are too good at what they do. They're almost invisible to humans and their prey, because they hardly need to move.
It takes 3 adults to take just one of these pythons away, and there are a lot of pythons. In response, authorities enlisted the help of private experts skilled in dealing with invasive pythons. They set up a whole payment scheme, with the amount depending on the size of the snake. Burmese python hunters get paid by the hour, either $13 or $18 depending on the location. On top of that, they earn $50 for each snake that's up to 47 inches long, and an extra $25 for every additional foot. Getting rid of a snake nest can pocket them $300.
Joining Florida's fight against pythons is open to anyone without special qualifications. If you're a hunter, fisherman, or outdoor enthusiast with a knack for taking down pythons or other big creatures in the wild, you're eligible to apply. They even host an annual event called the Florida Python Challenge, where volunteers get 10 days to hunt down and get rid of as many pythons as they can. The top prize for the winner is $10,000, and even the second place contender walks away with a respectable $7,500.
These are the winners last year. If you thought catching pythons was a walk in the park, think again. Python hunting is no easy feat. Beginners often wander through the woods for hours. Pythons are elusive. It's not about lacking effort. Many just run out of steam. Experts agree this isn't a hobby for everyone. Picture this. You're trudging through rough ground in low light for hours, just hoping to spot something. Oh, and try not to trip and hurt yourself.
If you really get into this gig, hunting pythons in Florida could turn into a legit job that pays well. There's a bunch of those invasive snakes around, plenty for everyone. So here's the thing, with all these animals being hunted, why not make good use of what we get? I mean, is it okay to eat snake meat? Many people, including myself, have been wondering about this for a while. Scientists have been looking into the mercury levels in pythons for a few years now to figure out if they're suitable for human consumption. If it turns out that eating pythons is safe, we might start seeing python dishes in restaurants or even on store shelves. But people actually eat snakes. What about parakeets?
You can't tell right away, but these parakeets are not sitting somewhere in the forest, but on a tree on a busy city street. Ring-necked parakeets fly over Turkey's different regions each year, with their population on the rise. People even create reports about these parakeets. These birds are actually quite friendly and gorgeous. They add charm to trees and parks, mostly in Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir. The catch is these parakeets are considered invasive. Just a few decades ago, there weren't any in Turkey at all. Not a single one.
The history of ring-necked parakeets in Istanbul began with a tragic traffic accident in 1996. In the Beykoz area, a pickup truck carrying parakeets overturned, setting hundreds of birds free after their cages fell apart. Another factor is that birds brought into the country illegally and caught at customs are also usually released into nature. Apparently, no one thinks about the consequences, though they really should. Eventually, the population of ring-necked parakeets in Istanbul has soared to over 6,000, whereas just 5 years ago, there were only a couple hundred. Parakeet population's on the rise. On one side, these parakeets in Istanbul kind of blend in with the city's vibe. They're also causing trouble by messing with the local urban wildlife balance. The parakeets are getting cozy in crows, bats, and even squirrels' nests, sparking some clashes between the species. But parakeets have numbers on their side. They're practically the new pigeons in town.
Nope, London's the place where parakeets took over. More precise, rose-ringed parakeets from the Himalayas and temperate regions of North Africa.
It's amazing, but no one knows exactly when and how London became home to wild parakeets. There are a bunch of stories about these cool green birds, and it's tough to pin down a single explanation. They're just there, you know?
Nowadays, you can spot their nests just outside. You walk out and voila, there they are, the parakeets.
And these parakeets are clearly not going to disappear. On the contrary, despite the climate, they are thriving. According to recent estimates, their number reaches tens of thousands. By the way, here's one of the interesting versions of their appearance. The parakeets escaped from the filming of the classic 1951 film The African Queen, starring Humphrey Bogart and Audrey Hepburn. Then the birds were brought to recreate the equatorial swamps of East Africa at the British studio Isleworth Studios, but there are no parakeets in the movie itself, so it's either an urban legend or, well, the birds escaped before the filming process even started. Which theory do you like the best?
Actually, the fascination of Londoners with exotic parakeets dates back hundreds of years. They escaped, united, and multiplied. And now we have this.
Germany also has a good number of these parakeets, and it's kind of like London, just without the Audrey Hepburn legend.
Don't be fooled by the cuteness of parakeets. They might seem adorable, but these little guys are actually invasive creatures making themselves at home in cities worldwide. The newcomers are out competing local birds for food and even steal squirrels' cozy nests.
Why not eat them, you ask? Well, for starters, who really goes out hunting parakeets anyway? Takes a lot of effort. And secondly, perhaps the idea just never crossed anyone's mind. Sure, we know they're technically edible, but the notion of opening a restaurant centered around cooking invasive parakeets? No, that hasn't really popped up.
I'm curious about why parakeets thrive in London. It's not like Istanbul, the climates are entirely different.
The thing is, we tend to think of parakeets as tropical birds. In fact, mild English winters are not much harsher than the climate at the foot of the Himalayas, where the birds come from. And since the temperature continues to rise every year, the birds feel just fine. Parakeets got lucky with their new home. It turned out to be just right. Not everyone can say they've had that kind of luck. This is where you'll usually find humpback whales. Essentially, they do well in places that aren't too cold and have sufficient depth. But what if I told you that the whale got in here?
Crowds naturally flock to witness it. The video dates back a couple years, back when the humpback whale captured the affection of Montreal locals as it stayed in one of the city's ports.
The whale won the hearts of city residents, bringing in crowds to Montreal's old port. Everyone was curious to see a creature that normally wouldn't be found in this area. Experts discovered that a humpback whale made its way to Montreal through the St. Lawrence River. Later on, it was spotted floating in a river around 18 miles downstream from the city.
This was the first time a humpback whale had made its way into the waters of Montreal. There it is, see? Chilling on the waves. Experts hoped that the whale would return to its natural habitat in the Gulf of St. Lawrence when it began to move downstream, but it didn't. In the end, the whale was found dead.
It's really sad, but hardly surprising. A healthy-looking whale might pass away for various reasons, like getting dehydrated from being in fresh water for too long, or maybe colliding with a boat.
Eventually, the animal that made the locals so happy was simply taken out of the water and disposed of.
But okay, let's talk about more fun things. Meet the hippos of Pablo Escobar. Have you heard about this man? Yes, you must have heard.
Everything began right here. Renowned for his notorious cases, Pablo Escobar possessed a vast ranch in Colombia housing a personal zoo, home to 4 hippos. Even though these hippos were brought into the country illegally, when you're talking about Pablo Escobar, laws seem to be flexible. After Escobar's death in 1993, the hippos were left to roam freely. Catching and moving them seemed like more trouble than it was worth, so they decided to just leave the hippos in an old estate. Just so you know, it was 1 male hippo and 3 females.
These hippos did what animals of different sexes typically do when the weather's nice and there's plenty to eat. By 2007, there were already 16 hippos, and they started wandering around looking for food in the nearby Magdalena River. In early 2014, there were 40 hippos spotted in Puerto Triunfo, and by 2019, their numbers had reached about 100. According to predictions, we might see thousands of them in a few decades. That's quite a growth rate for such hefty creatures, especially considering how far they are from home.
It's just bad news all around. Farming areas are no place for hippos. They're huge and can be seriously dangerous.
Over the years, environmentalists have viewed hippos as a troublesome invasive species responsible for wreaking havoc on local ecosystems. Studies indicate that hippos can alter the makeup of wetlands simply by moving through them. A 2020 study revealed that in Colombian lakes where hippos reside, there's a rise in nutrient levels and cyanobacteria. These bacteria can trigger harmful algae blooms which kill aquatic life. To put it simply, these massive creatures leave a trail of destruction in their wake, leaving behind a grim aftermath. Plus, hippos can change ecosystems by feeding on plants and pushing away native species.
Let me repeat. Hippos are huge and aggressive. They'll attack you like this simply if they don't like you. This means they pose a serious threat to fishermen and other locals, although it seems no one has died so far.
But that doesn't mean we should just leave things be. In November 2023, Colombia's environment minister revealed plans to deal with the growing hippo population. The plan involves various steps, and one of them is to neuter around 40 hippos each year. Interestingly, this procedure isn't cheap. It costs $50,000 to sterilize just one hippo. See you later.